Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody. I can see that it's cloudy in many places, and welcome to our people listening from all over different countries. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And this is the third webinar we've done with World Trade Group, so hope that we can keep it lively and interesting for you. What we're going to be doing today is talking about spectacular ROI on culture change using a case study done with Bombardier Transportation. So what I'm going to do in the agenda is tell you something briefly about Bombardier so that you can set the culture change key learning areas in the subject. The first is integrating the approach to business transformation so that you can make sure that all your change messages are aligned. Aligning the change to your KPIs so that you can look at measuring the change outcomes. Creating resilience in people to enable them to deal with the stress of change and to deal also with any resistance or blocking to change. And finally, looking at achieving accelerated performance through the medium of effective teamwork so that you can focus on delivering results. We're going to have a brief question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Hopefully we'll pick up on some questions that we can see from the people attending today. Just in case your question doesn't get answered, what we will do is answer any outstanding questions directly to you via email following on in the next 2 or 3 days following on from the webinar. So if there's anything you want to ask us that we don't get time to address, please, we will definitely come through to that and answer those questions in the next 2 or 3 days. So starting now on the first area, the background to Bombardier Transportation. So Bombardier Transportation is a global organization. They employ about 35,000 people worldwide. They're a global leader in rail technology for trains, metros, transit systems, and all the support functions around those. They engage in massive capital projects with high visibility, great complexity. There are multi-site, multi-division projects, and they have a long-term reach and long-term duration. They'd conducted a global restructure program starting in 2008 to move to a project-led organization supported by a matrix organization in which they had large project core teams and functional teams across many divisions within Bombardier and across all the continents. And we'd been engaged in running 2 global programs for Bombardier. The first was a leading in complexity without functional power program, directed originally to project managers only, but later on it was spread out to all people in the project core structure. And we're also taking part in a team effectiveness workshop and program, again delivered globally. But what we're going to do today is focus on one particular division to give you some more granularity and detail about the specific change activities. And we're going to concentrate on the UK rolling stock division in Derby. And there were 4 major projects underway starting in 2010. The rolling stock division is now part of the overall services division within Bombardier. Now, Derby site employed around about 2,000 people who were a mixture of permanent and contract staff. But in April 2010, the business results were not too sparkling. The output was less than half of the planned target, and the backlog was growing. And given that the projects were very visible, the delays were reported extensively in the media. As a result of delays, margins were not achieved, cash targets were missed, and customers were not happy with what was going on at the time. And sometimes the relationships were rather aggressive and confrontational between customer and BT. So it was not a happy sight at that time. In terms of culture, there was an emphasis on a command and control leadership style, which is really rather historical style in the rail industry. There was no change at all in Derby. It was there in Derby. And there was a lot of reporting, a lot of demands on people to report what was actually happening at various layers in the organisation. And because people felt they were being checked up on, there was a kind of a poor accountability and ownership of solving problems and achieving results. KPIs were confusing. People reported conflicting priorities and unclear decision criteria. And there was a blame culture which manifested itself in terms of what we call a silo mentality, people really looking out only for their own area. And there was poor cooperation or little cooperation between teams. Now again, this is fairly symptomatic of the rail industry historically, but there was a result of that tended to be a focus on short-term problem solving rather than a long-term fix. But that sounds rather negative, but actually our experience of working with Bombardier as an organisation, not just in Derby but globally, is that people working for Bombardier worked very hard. They were proud of Bombardier and proud of Bombardier's products and wanted to achieve results. So after the culture change programme was rolled out, there were some very good results reported in April 2011. Output grew by 400% to the highest ever achieved in site history. Projects were delivered on time despite previous delays. The profit in the first quarter of 2011 had doubled, and as a result, margin targets were achieved and cash targets were exceeded. Now, even though output had grown by 400%, quality also had improved by 400%, and the lowest number of faults reported in trains ever on the site. And as a result of that, the customer relationships really improved significantly, and Derby became a reference site. Now, in terms of business culture, the leadership style had changed to one of support as well as challenge. And as a result of that, accountability and ownership of results had increased. And cooperation between functions, between project teams and functions, and between project teams had greatly improved. There was a move towards joint problem solving across project teams and between functions. And teams started to look for long-term solutions. And in that culture of more openness, people were able to develop their skills and capability. So what we're going to do in this webinar is we're going to hear from 4 people who played a significant role in the culture change programme. There are many others, but we've asked 4 of them to represent Bombardier today. The first is Francis Paonessa. He is the president of Rolling Stock Division, and he joined the organisation in March 2010. He plays a significant role in the culture change. He was a champion of the change. We're also going to hear from Neil Shaw. He's the manager of the Project Management Office locally in Derby. He is a key link between the Global Project Management Office organisation, located in Berlin, and the local Derby site. So he played a role in rolling out some of the global programmes into the local site and making the most of these programmes locally. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the photograph of Andy Derbyshire. He was a project director of one of the major projects at the time when the Culture Change programme started. He's now the Senior Director of Operations at Derby, and we'll be hearing from him later about the future, how he sees the culture change rolling forward into the future. We're also going to be hearing from Alan Fravellini, who was also a project manager of one of the major projects we're going to refer to, and is now leading a new project which started at the end of last year, 2011, the Southern 130 project. So we're going to hear from them about how the culture change programme started historically, where we are now, and how we see the future moving forward. So moving over to the first area of learning from the webinar, it's about integrating the approach to business transformation. So we're going to shortly hear from Francis Paonessa, who's the president of Rolling Stock Division, and he started the Culture Change programme off in Derby and was a key sponsor and champion. Francis is a strategic thinker, so it was really important that we developed with him a strategic and integrated approach to the whole programme. And that needed to be supported by a strong operational plan of what we were going to do, with clear steps and with measurable results. So the whole thing became a package of joined-up thinking.
Within Bombardier, we had a significant change programme in front of us. But before we embarked on that change, it was important for us to understand the myths, values and behaviours that existed within the business so that we could carry out the minimum amount of change to get the maximum impact. To get the most out of any business, it's important that everyone's pointing in that same direction. And it was a real challenge in front of us to harness everybody's individual contribution and get that pointing in that same direction and get the most out of the business. What fell on the back of that was therefore making sure that any changes that we made in values and behaviours and the way in which we went about doing our work were all aligned, were all consistent, and that those messages flowed right from the top all the way down to the bottom of the organisation.
So what I'm showing you now on the screen is a way of thinking about implementing change that we've used in several organisations, and if you've seen earlier webinars you may recognise it. It's the result of some McKinsey work that was reported in 2003. What it says is that you need to think about change in three key areas: the systems and processes, how things work, and in Bombardier's case they were excellent in this area and regularly invested a lot of time and effort into clear systems and processes, integrated systems and processes. But the two other areas that we identified were really important was the whole area of mindset. So that's what people think their purpose is and how they fit into the bigger picture. And then thirdly, the whole area of culture. And Francis has already alluded to that in some way as well. And this is really what people actually do. The next aspect of the McKinsey work, which we found very helpful, is the idea of having 4 conditions that need to be present in order for change to be successful. And this helped us focus on the design of the interventions and particularly how we measured the success of the outcomes. So those are that there are role models at every level, that people believe in their role and their purpose, so they don't just know it, they actually believe in it and why it's important, that targets match the desired behaviour rather than driving unhelpful and unwanted behaviours, and that people have skills and can coach other people, so that using those ideas, change will reach people at every level in the organisation. So we use the McKinsey model alongside our own model of talent management. And what this enabled us to do was picking up on the idea of the smallest amount of change for the maximum benefit that Francis mentioned. We were able to focus on exactly where to do the work and why the work was needed. Now, the smallest amount of change idea may run a bit counterintuitive to sometimes the messages that we hear about change, that transformational change is important, etc. But in particular with the Bombardier side, because there was an inherent mistrust of change, we felt it was very important that we scaled it to something that people could believe in and weren't actually exhausted by. So we used that idea, and we used the talent management model to focus on the design of the program. What do we pay attention to? And we identified that the 2 key areas were talent optimization, in other words, how the site was utilising staff and how the roles were defined, etc., and talent engagement. So that was the holy grail of many organisations, getting the discretionary effort from people and making sure that people were motivated and supporting of the business goals. The other thing that it helped us to identify with was really, where do you do the work? And so we realised that because of the team structure within Bombardier and the fact that it played such an important part, that what we needed to do was to focus on supporting managers in running teams effectively, and that was the sort of the 2 key links that would end up delivering talented individuals. And the whole thing joined together at the organisational level with Francis's support and encouragement.
In support of that, Jackie, I'd reiterate, with the Bombardier structure, they form and reform teams. Although teams are in place often for a long period, they do have new team members coming and going, and so the ability to form and get a team up and running very effectively and quickly is quite an important factor in delivering success overall for their organisation.
Absolutely. Okay. Now the next slide introduces Neil Shaw. And what Neil is going to be doing, he'll be describing the starting point for the pilot of the Team Effectiveness Programme, which actually started in Derby and was intended to be a global programme. So Neil, just to remind you, was a key sponsor and champion linked into group
of the whole team effectiveness programme and the culture change programme in Derby?
We'd tried all sorts of process development, tool developments. We'd invested in these. We weren't getting the performances we wanted from those, and we realised that actually to get the best out of those we need to make an investment in the people in terms of behaviours and values. And it was seen that the approach that had been used on leadership skills could follow that through and give us those.
So what I'm going to do now is describe in a little bit more detail the overall change programme that we embarked on with Bombardier locally at Derby. Starting and keeping in mind in all these activities the three areas to make change successful, looking at systems and processes as measured by roles and targets and KPIs, the mindsets as looked at by values and beliefs and important to build trust, and the specific skills and behaviours. So looking at the left-hand side of the screen, we mentioned that we were engaged in a global programme for leadership skills with project managers. And this had been very successful, and project managers had thought that some of the techniques and the content of this programme could be rolled out into their teams. And as a result of that, the global organisation had invested in developing a team effectiveness workshop, which looked at passing on some of these skills and approaches. So Neil Shaw had helped us to pilot the team effectiveness workshop within Derby. He also helped us to deliver the team workshop, which was a 2-day event, to the other 3 core project teams on Derby site. And as a result of this, we were able to analyse some key trends and problems and the capability of the project teams. We were able to feed this back to the president of the RS1 site, Francis Paunessa. As a result of this feedback and analysis, Francis asked us to engage in developing for him some specific Bombardier values for the rolling stock site in Derby, which would highlight the areas of change. We then took part in a rollout to the entire top management team at a 1-day event, and followed that up with a 2-day event for the executive team to make sure that they were really clear and bought into the new values and behaviours, because they were going to ask and challenge to be the role models of the new behaviours on the site. These values were also then rolled out to the functional team so that everyone had a joined-up message, and was supported very successfully by the communications team at Derby site, who developed some communication materials, such as slides, posters, newsletters and so on, to reinforce the values right across the site. And they were also supported by the HR team, who looked at rolling out the values in terms of development and in terms of assessment of people and people's behaviours. We supported this by looking at targeted coaching for individuals who were role models, sometimes in 3 ways. Role models for behaviours that were not required, role models for behaviours to support people to develop the new behaviours, and the third area really was what we called marriage guidance for some of the teams and individuals, where we helped them resolve some of the relationship problems that they were having in various areas of the business. And to do this, we used some of our NLP techniques in terms of looking at the values and beliefs that were either limiting change or driving change on an individual basis. And we were able then to feed back any observations back to Francis and across the business. Mainly, I would say, we passed on any feedback that we got that was supportive from one area of the business to another. I think this is a very important area, sometimes overlooked. We passed around good messages from one area of the business to the other to show and embed the supportive culture there. So in fact, we were a trusted advisor in doing this, and we were able to maintain confidentiality as well, which I think was also helpful. So I'd like to ask you get some feedback from the audience now with our first of our poll questions. And the question is, in your organisation, do you have change initiatives that get started and don't get completed? Now what you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen is that question and the option to answer yes or no. And while you're responding, we'll continue with our webinar. Moving on to the second area, which is looking at aligning change to KPIs. So it was very important that when we were determining KPIs for the change, that we were addressing real problems. So I just want to mention here a couple of diagnostics that we used for identifying where the problems were. And these were the Team Effectiveness Questionnaire, which we used as part of the Team Effectiveness Programme, which in itself gave areas of sort of measured areas of strength and areas for development in terms of roles, objectives, that sort of area, methods and processes, and also values and behaviours. So this gave us a joined-up analysis and approach to thinking through what we were going to do. So we were looking at, well, where are the problems and what do we need instead? And the thing that came out of these diagnostics was really very, very much in support of Francis's message, which was that we needed to reinforce the values and behaviours that were going to drive the change. So just the next slide shows you some of our work on values. Now we made quite an important decision here really, that we actually identified 5 values that we recommended that had come out of our contact with Derby site. And we decided to recommend to Francis that some of the values highlighted existing strengths, as well as specifying the difference in behaviours that we wanted to leverage and encourage in the culture change. Now, highlighting strengths, I think, was a very important thing to do, because I think you remember we said earlier that people on the site worked really, really hard and were really, really committed to the success. So the worst thing you can do with a group of people like that is to sort of write off everything they've done and tell them that everything needs to be different. So this was very much a way of showing respect to the support and loyalty of existing employees. So there were 5 values, and if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see that this is a reminder of some of the business culture problems that Bombardier was experiencing: command and control, poor accountability, short-term areas, confusing KPIs. So we identified 2 values here. One was the value of forward thinking, and the second was the value of delivering results, which was the thing that they were really already massively focused on. As well as the definition and the labelling of the values, we helped identify a few bullet point behaviours that were very clear and very precise to be communicated across the site. So we were looking to leverage these specific behaviours and enable staff to see what the behaviours meant and how easy it was actually to do them.
I think specifically this was to address those areas of those problems that we'd identified, so the behaviours were specific to the problems.
Absolutely. Okay. And the second slide shows you 2 of the other values. The 5th one we haven't mentioned here was satisfying customers. Again, that was something that there was no argument about. They were absolutely, totally focused on that. So the 2 areas here that were different were working together, and you'll see in the definition the emphasis on cooperation enthusiastically here, and building trust, showing respect for everyone, being honest, but very importantly demonstrating empathy. So the culture problems were supported by these values, and as Mandy's already said, the 5 values were communicated and reinforced extensively by the senior leadership team across the site.
And by the communications team as
and
well.
by the communication and HR team. So let me just clarify here, because this is a section on KPIs. The values themselves and the behaviours became key KPIs that we were measuring.
So, second of our poll questions, are KPIs driving the right sort of behaviours in your organisation? Again, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen the poll question with 3 options now for responses: yes, no, or some of them. So just a little bit more detail on the type of KPIs. What we're talking and KPIs that measure behaviours. So, for example, some specific behaviours of building trust or delivering results are also measurable KPIs, as well as things like whether you've achieved revenue targets or targets of hours and things like that. So it's KPIs relating to tasks and behaviours.
Actually, just to interject here really, I think this is a sort of area that people often call attitude, and they sort of say he's got a bad attitude, and actually that's not a very helpful way of thinking about it. So in giving people specific behaviours, we could actually get away from that whole generalised criticisms around people's attitude, which can just offend people. So what we're going to do now is hear from Neil Shaw as he talks briefly about the need to align roles, goals and KPIs linking to team goals.
And we were very clear on roles and responsibilities, and as well as everything we did about tying people's roles and individuals' responsibilities, we linked those to the team goals, and actually people could see how their particular area contributed to which of the goals, so it made sure people were aligned and their efforts were aligned with the goals.
So what I'm going to do now is explain a little bit more detail how we did this. We have a particular technique that we use to enable people to gain greater clarity about their own role. And we use this technique in facilitated workshop as part of the Team Effectiveness Workshop programme for people to get clarity about their own role, but also, more importantly, to get greater clarity about the common goals that they saw within their project and within the business. And it's fair to say that this took some discussion because people have different views about this. What we were able then to do was to ask each individual to look at their own area of responsibility in their role and map on how this area of responsibility delivered to the overall project and business goals, and to highlight that the project goals then become the priorities for any decision making, even as an individual member, that would affect the overall project delivery. So these became the decision criteria. And on the back of that, we were able to help people get clarity about how their individual role KPIs linked to the overall project KPIs, so that all the KPIs were aligned. Now moving on now to the third area, which is about creating resilience in people to cope with the stress of change and to remain engaged and motivated through the change programme. So you'll hear Neil Shaw again, and this time he's looking very much at the area of talent, team and team engagement. So he's going to talk about the sort of types of interventions that we did in the pilot, and he's going to also introduce the idea of culture.
So we ran the Team Effectiveness Workshop, weren't at the point of doing it very clear as to what we would get out of it, but obviously we thought it was going to give us a benefit. So what did come out? A lot of things were challenged to be more supportive and to come with an achievement culture. So we changed the way that we put governance into the project and the reporting to actually encourage positive feedback and supportive behaviour to each other. It was something that the team wanted to do, and so that meant a change in the project director in terms of how we integrate with the people. So we introduced weekly one-to-ones with a core team, individual members, and the reporting structure that we put in place actually focused on achievements, targets, and specifically looking at what support was required between team members to reinforce this supportive culture that we wanted. That was all done within a framework of a set of team rules which they generated, and they recognised that because of the pressure they were under, they were spending a lot of time in meetings, so they actually did terms of reference for each meetings to make sure the right people were attending, what the agendas were, that they were getting the best use of that investment in that time. Using the Myers-Briggs, there was a better understanding of each other and the way that the people worked, so some frustrations that people had working with each other, the Myers-Briggs gave a framework to understand that and for people to make accommodations for each other to actually make the working more effective, and that became a lot better. Because of the values about openness and trust, people became more open with the issues. We will be able to address those earlier and with a full support of that. So we moved away from a sort of blame culture that we had before to be one about achievement, and that worked very well. It created a very strong team identity, which was a very positive thing, and the environment was very positive, and it was a happy team. who worked in there. They were under a lot of pressure, but it was a very positive team, and they celebrated success, not by major events, but it would be if they'd achieved a milestone. It could be cream cakes were bought for the team or something like that, but the team became focused on success and on making achievements and rewarding those.
Judging by what Neil says, it's not expensive to keep your team motivated. I think the cost of the cream cake per head is not a lot of money to invest.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to talk about now actually is this idea of creating resilience in people through really developing a supportive culture. Because what was noticeable to me when Neil taught there was that, if you remember, Bombardier had a massive reporting, reviewing culture. So what you have now is a reporting culture that, instead of is focusing on blaming, is focusing on supporting. So the switch of mindset was really very, very critical to the whole success of the program. So how do we do this? Now, Neil mentioned Myers-Briggs, and we use Myers-Briggs extensively in our work. But people tell us that we use it differently, and that's really pleasing, because we have set out to use it differently. So what we've done is we've connected 3 areas. The first one is that we've looked at neuroscience. So we've gone on courses about the brain, read about neuroscience. We worked with a neuroscientist to try and understand how does, in effect, how does Myers-Briggs work in terms of the brain, and what's the science, neuroscience of stress and resilience. The second area is actually in using MBTI as a model itself, because it's a very robust one, and even though it's been around for some time, and some people poo-poo it a bit, there's a whole range of materials and books and support. And the third area is NLP, and the thing we picked out there really was to focus on the whole area of values, because we understood how important values are in terms of both driving our motivation, judgment, decision-making, relationships, all sorts of things. So in pulling those themes together, we took people through 3 steps. The first one was that they understand the differences and the problems that difference can cause. So they know what preference they have, they know what that means, and most importantly, they know what that means for their values. The second step is to encourage a process of appreciation. So firstly, appreciating themselves and their preferences, because there were quite a lot of people who were really sort of stressed on the site and had lost a bit of self-belief. So believe in yourself, appreciate yourself, and appreciate others and the values that they can add. And thirdly, and I think this was a very important aspect, we showed them how to adapt by using a toolkit of core skills, and everybody was taken through the same skills and techniques. So it was the smallest amount of change for the maximum benefit. So just to remind you, if you're not familiar with the MBTI model, there are 4 dichotomies, and the screen sort of shows what they're about. So we focused on using science, which is important for a technical audience. We used a structured approach, and we talked about emotional logic. They like that because they like logic. We showed the cause and effect and how differences can create conflict, and we gave them practical solutions that they could use on the job, and these solutions were consistent and reinforced. So I'll quickly take you through the slides that we use. For example, for one of the dichotomies, the sensing and intuitive dichotomy, which is about how people take in information. So sensing people, which were, this group was by far the most prolific group on the site in terms of preference. They like detail, they like the here and now, they're practical, and they like process, and they have a huge value for their existing experience. The intuitive preference really likes the big picture, wants to know why things happen, thinks about the future, and people who focus and really enjoy looking at possibilities, particularly for change. So we were able to show that your personality actually affected your focus of attention, and there were some lone ends in project teams who would say, well, when I say something, I feel I'm not connecting. So people understood what was going on. And when we put this slide up, it usually created loud guffaws and amusement, because people could actually see this happening in meetings and all around them. So again, some of the Ns and not that it's only Ns that come up with new ideas, because I'm an S myself, but that new ideas were put forward, or even a discussion of the future, and people just got overwhelmed and shouted down. So, and the sensing people recognised that they just were perhaps feeling a bit impatient and frustrated by people who didn't seem to be getting the point or the urgency of the things that needed to be done. The most important thing, though, was this, what we call our red and green zones. And what this enabled us to do was to defuse some of the conflict and tension in people, because what we encouraged them to see was, starting from a basis of their own values, they could see that they had a way of thinking about their colleagues with opposite preferences in a constructive and positive way. Whereas in actual fact, it enabled them to identify that they were thinking some of these red thoughts, if not actually saying them out loud to one another. So the whole thing introduced a formal, informal, if you like, and structured, but way of just getting rid of some of the tension and sort of leaving the aggravation of the past behind. Finally, here's just an example of one of the adapting slides that we showed. But the key thing here is that we taught people how to chunk information, chunking being an NLP-based technique. And so instead of just sort of waiting and getting frustrated, people could say, could you chunk up a bit? Could you chunk down a bit? And again, a little bit of humour, and it just diffuse the tension.
So what we're going to do now is hear from Alan Fravellini, who's a Senior Project Manager for the Southern 130 project now, where he talks about using these techniques in a practical way as a universal language with a common toolkit throughout the team, and how it helped him as an individual, made him more resilient, and helped create a supporting team.
So we're talking about team effectiveness. For the Southern project, we undertook a team effectiveness course initially. That was important because we've got a team of people who had worked together previously in a different project, but also new people who'd come together and didn't know particularly how to understand people's behaviours and the dynamics of how they would work within that team and with other individuals. So I think by undertaking the workshop we achieved a lot of things. Primarily we achieved a very good understanding of each other's behaviours and each other's styles and the way in which people digest and process information that may appear different to different people. And that's important because we exchange a lot of information throughout the working day, working week. I think what it did by understanding, it certainly helped me, particularly with people who had a different behaviour to me and a different working style. It helped me understand a lot more why that was, and it's helped me deal with those people a lot more effectively, both in meetings, perhaps in private and in open forums where there are other people. I think the way that we saw the benefits were, well, two ways really. One, we saw it on paper through the feedback and the scoring that we got. But I think where we've seen it most is during difficult times that we've hit upon, and the way that people have treated each other. We've definitely got more of a supporting environment and team rather than a "I told you so" and heavily aggressive "you need to go and do this now." There's very much a joined up approach to problem solving, and very much a culture where people offer support to different people to try and get problems solved.
Can I just ask you, does that just affect the team, or is it elsewhere in the organisation you've noticed that change?
No, I think it rubs off elsewhere in the organisation. I think it rubs off slower than with the immediate team. The feedback we've had from particularly senior people within other functions outside of the core team is that on this project, because of the way that we're working, they're starting to change their behaviour patterns more in line with ours, in that rather than jump to aggressive accusations, there's more of a sit down, let's understand and how we can tackle this problem together culture.
What we're going to do, here is a slide which just lists briefly the techniques that we use, so that's more for reference later on. What we're going to do now is hear from Alan as he describes the impact that the change had on senior managers as role models throughout the site.
I think one of the other good examples of how behaviours can affect people within the organisation, certainly from the top down, the culture at Derby has certainly changed very much from the most senior levels, where there's more of a logical, calm and decision-based reaction to issues and problem solving, rather than what we've had in the past is a very much immediate reaction that's had a negative effect on people within the immediate environment and of course through the rest of the workforce. So yeah, I think behaviours have certainly changed for the better.
When you talk about an immediate reaction had a negative impact, can you give me an example of a type of response?
In the past we've tried to find out where it's gone wrong and perhaps who to blame. I think the culture nowadays, certainly at president level, is very much a logical approach of how we need to fix it and who can help sort the problem out, rather than pinpointing where it went wrong.
Moving on now to the fourth area of our webinar, Accelerating Performance Through Teamwork. And hopefully you've seen the poll question on your screen and be able to answer that. That's the last poll question in our webinar. What we're going to do now is look at the team effectiveness. And we'll do this very quickly. This is a slide that shows the generic goals of the team effectiveness program. And what we did with each time we ran it was we agreed the specific goals for a project with the project manager or project director. And we were able to look at the team personalities of each team using MBTI. So the diagnostics were the ones that we mentioned earlier. The team effectiveness questionnaire itself and call the team personality, we could actually identify how to go about giving the team support that it needed. So we're going to hear now from Neil Shaw as he talks about the results from the pilot team effectiveness workshop. So over to you, Rima.
Hi there, Mandy. I'm just waiting for a couple of people to finish up just submitting their responses to the poll, which is just the very final one. In the meantime, would you mind just maybe giving a little bit of background on this part?
Okay. What Neil is going to talk about in the next piece of audio is the measurable results that they achieved from following on from the team effectiveness workshop in terms of business benefits, hard measurable business outcomes. So he's going to talk about one particular pilot, one particular project on the site, and we're also then going to hear from Alan Fravellini talk about one of the other projects, where we hear him talk about his ability to set tasks to people based on their behavioural capability, which was an additional benefit from the workshops, in that we're able to put the best person to the best task for them. And in order to do that, that shows actually that they had developed an area of trust between the project manager and the project core teams, helping the teams to become more flexible and sharing resources when resources were scarce across the organisation. So it really is about when they've started to demonstrate the values and behaviours that were required, what were the benefits achieved by those project teams for the business.
Well, this project was very, very challenging in terms of its lead time. There were some issues with suppliers' lead times that we had to overcome, and in theory, on paper, this project was late when we won it. That brought a lot of challenges to it, but because of the way that the team was working together, the net result was that this project was delivered on time, and it turned in the required level of profitability for the company, and the degree of customer satisfaction was very high as well. So in terms of the soft deliverables, soft benefits, we got those, and they definitely led to hard business commercial benefits.
We're now going to hear from Alan Fravellini talking about the business results that he noticed in his current project, the Southern 130 project, following on from a one-day team workshop which we conducted for him in January this year.
So in terms of business benefits, what would you say they are that you've noticed?
First and foremost, I'd say the benefits are less wasted time. We understand people and the people that we work with a lot more effectively. It means that the way that we do our work, our challenging, our discussions, is a lot more effective. We're not doing things twice, we're doing things the first time round. We're perhaps not selecting people to do things who aren't, having understood their behaviour and style, are not the most appropriate people to do it. On paper they may be the person that's responsible to do it, but of course understanding the behaviours allows us to actually say to ourselves, is this person going to give us the most benefit with our task? And if the answer's no, we can decide where we go from there.
And how do you find people respond to that if they're someone else is doing something that's within their role?
I think providing that the consultation's been there in the first place, and that you've attacked it from a positive point of view of why you think it's a benefit. I've not come across an instance yet where people have felt put out by it. The one area where I think it does make give you more effectiveness is meetings. It makes the meetings a lot slicker and a lot quicker, because people aren't, we've not got heavily extroverted people trying to drill down right into the core of a person who's an introvert, and taking three laps round, when we now understand that there's a different way of attacking that, and the conversation's a lot more slicker. So I think for the project and the business, it's probably difficult to measure in an exact, we've collected this pot in pounds, shillings and pence, this is the saving we've made, but if we measured it on time saved and effectivity of work, it's increased tenfold.
What you see now on the screen are some of the verbal comments of feedback from the Team Effectiveness workshop and from working with people in the project on Bombardier. So lastly, we're going to hear from Andy Derbyshire, who's the Senior Director of Operations now on the Derby site. And here he talks about his project, which completed last year, and talks about the future and how the culture changes are embedded in the organisation and are the way we do things now. So this is the future for Bombardier moving forward.
The project we embarked with learning partners was on the LERL project, which was a project with tight deliverables, tight timescales. The issue we faced was with how the team worked together and the dynamic of the team in a matrix organisation. What learning partners, along with the team, were able to do was develop a process, workshops and a way of working for the team to achieve excellence, with the use of certain techniques such as Myers-Briggs, feedback, feed forward, and a way of working. We were able to understand personal motivation and team motivation and link that with the project deliverables. The project was a great success, delivery on time, and really challenged both the project team and the business of how to work properly. The team won several awards on the back of this project delivery, including Team of the Year worldwide in Bombardier. We've used this process and this way of working in these systems now to future-proof what we do within the organisation at all levels, to truly become a world leader in a very competitive market as Bombardier are. The way we behave, the way we interact through our teams on a local level or an international level are a key driver to our success. And I'm happy to say that we're using these techniques today. We've seen a massive change both culturally and within our business results because of these ways of working, these techniques. And actually the enjoyment in work, people with a smile on their face is an instant return that we see every day. And the feedback we get, a real success. And we continue to develop our processes along with learning partners and our ways of working to truly deliver on our commitments and delight our customers on a day-to-day basis.
So in summary here, these are the benefits that are reported to us by people within Bombardier to increase productivity. I think this is the area that we really talked about in spectacular ROI. Output was increased by 400%. The hours, so saving time and money, the hours taken to build the trains now on site are the shortest number of hours they've ever achieved. So Andy Derbyshire is continuing to make improvements in productivity because of the changes in culture. relationships are strengthened, cooperation's improved, the creativity and innovation is open more to discussion, more available. Certainly conflict was reduced on site and also between Bombardier and the customers, and a great deal of reduction in frustration and stress.